By the time the moon rose wrong over Hulla Ridge, Raina Holt had already started to smell blood in the snow that wasn't there. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. That's why Whispering Narratives keeps its lantern burning on nights like this. So travelers hear the warning before the forest hears them. They talk about moons that climb the sky the wrong shade of silver, about claw marks that appear where no animal should reach, about the way the trees lean forward when someone new arrives. They talk about the thing that chooses its vessel long before the first transformation, and what happens when that vessel finally answers. And tonight, whether she knew it or not, Holt had already been chosen. The sky should have been a clean winter black, stars pinpricked and sharp, the full moon a pale coin over the mountain spine. Instead, the light coming over the peaks had a color she didn't know how to name, to red to be natural, to silver to be fire, like something old had finally bled through the atmosphere. The flare of it caught on the glass of the bus window and painted her reflection in a sick, wet sheen. She blinked, and for a moment she could swear her own eyes weren't brown but a feral amber, catching the light like an animal in the road outside. The forest climbed up the hills in broken, black ranks, the tree line pressed close to the road, pines knitting together overhead so tightly they turned stretches of the highway into tunnels. The bustled engine groaned as it pushed against the grade, headlights carving a thin path through the dark. Raina could feel the woods watching, not with camera eyes or curious deer, with hunger. Every bump in the asphalt sent a tremor through her bones she felt too clearly, like her skeleton was listening. The driver coughed, then muttered a curse as something thudded against the undercarriage. A long, scratching sound dragged down the length of the bus metal on metal, high and wrong, like claws testing the shell. Everyone went still. Raina held her breath. The sound stopped just behind her row. No one got up to look. The bus rolled another 10 yards before its old heart gave out, engine choking into silence. In the sudden quiet, she could hear something breathing just beyond the thin wall of metal. Slow, wet, patient. She couldn't see it, but she could feel the way the night shifted its weight toward that side of the road, like a crowd leaning closer to a spectacle, whatever was outside. Whatever had followed them along that winding mountain road was waiting for the engine to die. The lights flickered once and then stayed on, dim and yellow. No one moved. No one spoke. Very softly, from the front, the driver whispered, "Not again." The words lodged under her skin. The night leaned harder. Folks in towns like this don't whisper their legends to scare children. They whisper them to stay alive. You can almost hear them now if you listen past the dead engine the way. Stories move from mouth to mouth in dim kitchens and smoky bars, names swallowed down with whiskey, warnings folded into ordinary conversation, like blades wrapped in cloth. They talk about moons that come up the wrong color, about claw marks on doors that weren't there the night before, about livestock taken clean from locked pens without a drop of blood. They talk about nights when the forest moves closer and doesn't move back. And if you stay long enough, if you listen the way the trees do, you start to realize something. The stories aren't meant to entertain you. They're meant to give you rules to die by a little slower. The bus heater rattled, dragging Raina back into the stale air and flickering light. Someone laughed nervously, too loud. The spell of that breathless moment snapped, but the weight of the forest outside did not. "Just a rock," the driver said, too quickly. "Old road, I'll check the engine." Everybody stay put. He stood, his shoulders already flinching before he reached the door. Raina watched his hand hover over the release lever, his knuckles white. He wasn't afraid of the cold. He was afraid of opening this thin metal shell to the thing that lived just outside it. He stepped down into the dark, The door folded shut behind him with a hollow sigh. Raina counted breaths. 1, 2, 3. The air felt thick in her lungs, like she was breathing through fur. 4, 5, 6. The woods outside whispered with something more than wind. 7. The first scream was short and ugly, cut off halfway like a radio losing signal. Someone in the back started sobbing. Another person clapped their hands over their ears. The bus did not move. Raina didn't know why she unclipped her belt. She didn't know why she stood, fingers trailing the cold metal of the seat backs as she made her way down the aisle. Her body felt both too light and too heavy, as if gravity had changed just for her. The driver's hat lay in the stairwell, crushed. Something had dragged him off the road and into the trees, leaving only deep gouges in the frozen mud where his boots had tried to hold. She should have gone back. She should have shut the door, listened to the others, waited for help that wouldn't come. Instead, she stepped down into the quiet and tasted iron in the air, sudden and rich on her tongue. It made her stomach clench in a way that wasn't quite disgust. The forest didn't sound like a forest anymore. It sounded like breathing. Far away, somewhere up along the ridgeline, a howl rose. It started low and animal, and then did something wrong halfway through, bending upward into a human note. Of pain, it should have echoed off the mountains, bounced back in thin reflections. It didn't. The sound just climbed and climbed until it was too high to be an animal, too wild to be a person, and then cut off clean. A howl that refused to echo, as if the mountains knew better than to answer. Raina realized her teeth were clenched hard enough to ache. Something inside her chest resonated with that sound. A pulled string, a tuning fork struck by a distant hand. She backed up onto the bus, one foot on the step, the other on the frozen ground, caught between the artificial light and the blood-colored moon soaking into the snow. Her hands shook. She told herself it was fear. Underneath the fear, something else stretched and smiled. Halleridge looked like the kind of town people passed through without remembering the name. 20-4 hours later, Raina sat in a bar that smelled like old wood and older beer, her bus ticket folded and refolded in her pocket. The official story was a breakdown, a replacement part that had to be driven up from the valley. Unofficially, the driver was gone and nobody seemed surprised. Winter eats people, the bar owner had said with a shrug when she'd asked. Storms, falls, getting lost happens. He'd said it with the flat tone of someone reciting a line they didn't quite believe. The bar was low-ceilinged, lit mostly by a neon beer sign in the window and a line of mismatched lamps along the back wall. Locals clustered at the counter, their voices pitched low, eyes flicking to the big front windows every time the wind howled. Raina sat at a corner table with her backpack at her feet, nursing a coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since before she was born. The TV in the corner played some news her brain refused to hold. Her skin itched, the whisper of fabric against her arms too loud in her ears. Since the bus, small wrong things had started happening. She could hear conversations at the other end of the bar as clearly as if they were at her table. The hum of the old refrigerator in the back room was a distinct note under the clatter of glasses, a persistent mosquito whine of electricity. When the door opened and a man came in covered in snow, she smelt wet wool and fear before she saw him. The worst part was the moon. Even now, during the day, she could feel where it would rise, a tug behind her eyes, a line drawn between her and the horizon. On the bulletin board by the door, there was a sheet of paper pinned under a rusted nail. Winter rules do not ignore. No one out after first bell nose facing the woods. Do not open the door. If you hear scratching, do not acknowledge. The second HOWL. The last rule had been added in thready ballpoint. Different handwriting, letters pressed into the paper hard, enough to nearly tear it the second howl. You keep staring at that like it's going to change, Varona said, breaking into her thoughts. Raina startled. She hadn't heard him approach, but he was there now, setting a fresh mug of coffee on her table. His name tag read, Marlon. His eyes read, I've seen things I will never say out loud. Sorry, she said. Her voice sounded wrong to her. Too low, too rough, like it was shaking gravel out of itself. I just so's rules. Are they a joke? He snorted softly. You see anyone laughing? No, she admitted. Then maybe assume they're not. He went to turn away. On impulse, she caught his sleeve. His arm was solid under the faded flannel, muscles like cables. Someone used to splitting wood and shoveling snow. What happened to the driver? She asked, quiet. Marlon looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. His gaze lingered on her eyes for half a heartbeat longer than was comfortable, as if he were checking for a color he didn't want to find. Winter, he said again. Then, softer, and someone who didn't respect the first bell. First bell of what? You'll hear it, he said. If you're still here by dark. He pulled his arm free and walked away. Her fingers tingled where they'd touched him, a phantom impression of his pulse. Underneath the smell of coffee and bar rags and old pine, she could detect something else in animal temps. Fur and cold and the copper whisper of blood. It made the back of her throat ache. She told herself it was nothing. Altitude, bad coffee, lack of sleep. When she excused herself to the bathroom, she locked the stall door and forced herself to look in the mirror. Her face looked the same. Medium, brown skin, tired eyes bracketed by dark crescents, a scar along her jaw from when she'd fallen off a bike at 10. A life in the city had worn permanent tension into the corners of her mouth. Nothing supernatural, nothing monstrous. She leaned closer. Her pupils were too wide for the dingy bathroom light. The brown of her irises had a gold ring around the edge. She didn't remember. She frowned, and when she did, the muscles along her cheeks twitched, like something else was trying to mimic the expression from beneath. The fluorescent light fizzed overhead. For a heartbeat, the buzzing synced with the thrum of her pulse and the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled conversations outside and the distant scrape of wind against the siding. All of it coalescing into one single note. Hunger. She slapped the light switch off and stood in the dark, palms flat on the sink, breathing hard. If this reminds you of something you've heard before, some old story about the wrong moon, the wrong eyes in your own reflection, you're not alone. Dark came early to Hollow Ridge. By the time first bell rang, the town had already curled in on itself, every window blind drawn, every door locked and double bolted. Raina stood at the window of the small room above the bar that Marlon had reluctantly rented her for the night, watching the last of the light drain off the snow. The bell tolled from the little church at the town centre, a dull, mournful sound carried by the wind. 1, 2, 3 slow strikes. With each note, she felt something under her ribs answer. Her skin was too tight. Heat rolled under it in waves, though the room was cold enough for her breath to fog the glass. The space between her bones and muscles burned, as if invisible fingers were testing the seams. Don't be dramatic, she told herself. You're anxious. You're trapped in a town full of weird people and weirder rules. Your body's just reacting down on the street. Someone hurried along the sidewalk with their head down, a bag of groceries hugged close to their chest. Their steps skidded on the icy patch near the lamppost. They didn't look toward the forest edge, although the trees loomed just beyond the last row of houses, black and thick and listening. The bell stopped. Silence fell so hard it made her ears ring. She waited for normal night sounds, the soft thump of TV through the thin walls, distant laughter, a car door, a dog barking. Nothing came. It was as if the town had taken one collective breath and was holding it. Then, somewhere in the forest, something scratched. It wasn't at her door. It wasn't at the bar's back entrance. It wasn't on the street. It was bigger than that. A vast, slow rake of claw against the earth itself. A sound like the mountain being opened from the inside. The hairs rose along her arms. Do not open the door. If you hear scratching, the sign had said. She wasn't going to. She told herself that twice more, just to feel the shape of the lie. Her arm moved before she decided to move it, fingers finding the latch on the old window. The metal was so cold, it tore at her skin, but the pain was distant. The need to smell the night, to listen without glass between her and the dark, eclipsed everything. The window creaked open 1/2 inch. Air knifed into the room, sharp and wet. Snow, pine-old smoke from chimneys, the faint tang of diesel, and, under it, unmistakable now, animal, musky, wild, threaded with iron. Not the simple, clean smell of a wolf. Older, wrong. Her stomach turned over, her mouth watered. Far off, something howled. This time it did echo, rolling from ridge to ridge. A lower sound answered it, closer, the second howl. Do not acknowledge the second howl. Raina's hand rose to her throat, fingers digging into the notch at the base as if she could hold something in by force. The sound wasn't just in her ears, vibrated through the floorboards, climbed her spine, set a rhythm in her bones. Her vision blurred at the edges. The room smelled too human suddenly. Detergent, dust, the ghosts of 1,000 meals cooked downstairs. Her brain recoiled. She shut the window with more force than she intended. The glass rattled behind her. The door to her room rattled once. In answer, she froze. The knob turned, slow, testing. Marlon, she called, but her voice cracked halfway through his name, warped by the lingering vibration of the howl. The knob stopped moving. Scratch, 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 not on the wood inside her chest. She stumbled back as the first cramp hit. It drove her to her knees, a sharp, twisting pain that had nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with something rearranging itself underneath. Her spine arched, hands hitting the floor, fingers splayed wide. Her nails scraped the old boards, louder than they should have been. When she dragged her hands away, for deep grooves scored the floor, splintered wood curled up from the cuts. She stared at them, gasping. Her fingers looked the same, human, trembling. The second cramp took her breath away. Heat slammed through her joints, swelling them from the inside. Her ribs felt too tight, the cartilage straining. Every instinct said, tear yourself open before something else does. She crawled to the mirror over the dresser. The face that looked back at her was caught halfway between expressions, eyes blown wide, sweat slicking her hair to her forehead as she watched. Her pupils contracted, leaving more of that unfamiliar gold. Ripples moved under her skin like something turning over. In deep water, this was not anxiety. This was not altitude sickness. This was werewolf transformation, the kind whispered about in true horror stories and cryptid encounter threads. The kind people accused movies of exaggerating until they saw bones shift in real life. A whimper punched out of her. It sounded like an animal that had been stepped on. Outside, footsteps went past her door. Several sets, too light to be boots, too many. She crawled to the window again, hauling herself up by the sill. The moon had cleared the peaks fully now, swollen and obscene. Its light too bright, too red along the edges. It poured over the rooftops, over the snow, over the dark line of the forest. Shapes moved at the tree line. For a moment, she thought they were wolves. Then one stood, halfway, rear legs braced, front limbs stretching in a way no animal should. Its head cocked at an angle that suggested a question it already knew the answer to. The others stayed in the dark, eyes glinting. They were not coming into town. They were waiting for something inside it to come to them. Had asked the locals about that night. They'll look away before answering. She didn't remember opening the door. One moment she was on the floor of the room, curled around the pane. The next, she was in the narrow hallway, bare feet slapping the runner. The air was colder out here. It felt good on her skin, which burned everywhere the moonlight touched it through the tiny attic window above the stairs. Her senses had shredded and reformed. She could hear every board creak under her weight, every distant heart beating behind closed doors. Marlon's downstairs, steady and fast. Mrs. Keene in the room at the end of the hall, fluttering like a trapped bird. The heavy, slow thump outside. The others in the tree line, matching their breath to hers. Territorial behavior. They were giving her space. Her body was shifting weight automatically, favoring the balls of her feet, spine lengthening as she hunched without meaning to. The hallway felt too low, the walls too close. Her shoulders brushed them even when she tried to walk in the middle. She reached the top of the stairs and stopped. Marlon stood at the bottom, one hand on the banister. He had a shotgun leaned against the wall beside him, barrel pointed down, but he wasn't reaching for it. His eyes were on her face, on her eyes. "I was hoping we were wrong," he said quietly. His voice didn't sound surprised. It sounded tired. Raina's throat convulsed. Her words came out shredded. Wrong about what? About the bloodline skipping a generation. He swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Your mother was from here, wasn't she? Last name Holt before she married Al." Pain flared behind her sternum that had nothing to do with bones. "How do you know that?" "We know every name that leaves this place." He took one step up, careful, slow, not a threat, not turning his back either. "We watch the birth records, the death records. Who comes back when the moon starts pulling wrong? No one survives the night it chooses if they don't know what they are. My mother never told me," she whispered. Maybe she wanted to believe it ended with her. His gaze flicked to her hands. It didn't. Heat swept down her arms. For a moment, her fingers splayed in silhouette against the stairway wall. The shadows didn't match. Stretched and too long, claws where nails should be. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the banister. The wood creaked under her grip, then cracked with an ugly sound. Marlon flinched at the noise, but he didn't run. "You shouldn't be near me," she said. The air around her vibrated with a low, unconscious growl. "This town made a bargain a long time ago," he said. "We don't run from our own monsters." She saw it then, faint under the collar of his shirt when he shifted in the stairwell light, a scar shaped like a bite, human jaw width, too wide for any normal animal. "I survived my night," he said. "Some of us do. Most don't. The ones who make it through, we keep the others in line. You're not the first Holt to come back. You are the first woman in 3 generations, though sometimes the curse remembers what it liked best." Her stomach twisted. The lore she had half heard from late-night podcasts and horror narration channels, from fake-sounding true horror story uploads and whispered dogman lore, all slotted into place around the one thing that had always been missing. Her name. Cursed bloodline. Ancestral werewolf line. The reason her mother had never gone home for the holidays. "The others out there," she said, struggling to keep her voice human around the growing urge to howl. "They're waiting for you to choose a side." Marlon's face was unreadable. "You change inside the town. You hunt here. You change out there. You hunt the things that would rather drag us into the trees. We've been holding a border for a long time, Raina. It takes teeth on both sides to keep it in place." A white flash went through her vision. Her back arched, her shoulder popped out of its socket with a wet, tearing sound and then snapped back in at a different angle. Her scream was thin and high and animal. Marlon flinched, but he didn't move away. "You don't have long," he said. "The moon's nearly straight overhead. After that, there's no halfway. You either run on all fours, or you don't run again." Tears burned heart tracks down her face. Her voice tore itself out ragged. "How can you ask me to choose to become that?" "Because if you don't," he said softly, "the ones who didn't make peace with it will tear you apart and use your pieces to break the rules we've been bleeding to keep." He stepped down, giving her a clear path to the door. The shotgun stayed on the wall. "Go," he said. "But go before the second howl turns into a command." For a heartbeat, she hated him more than anything in the world. Then another cramp hit, and hate dissolved into raw animal need for relief. She ran. She didn't remember the transition from stairs to street. One moment she was inside, the next she was lunging out into the open, bare feet slamming into snow. The cold burned and then faded under the furnace in her muscles. The moon poured over her like molten metal. Her spine lengthened with a sick series of snaps. Vertebrae shifting, her balance pitched forward. She dropped to her hands. The fingers were too long now, nails curving into something harder, thicker. Her jaws stretched, teeth shoving against gum and bone until they had to go somewhere. They burst outward. Blood flooded her mouth, metallic and perfect. She gagged, then bit down on the air itself. The sound that came out of her chest was not human. Every nerve in her body lit up. It hurt. Of course it hurt. The stories never showed this part right. The slow, grinding set of one body being carved into the shape of another. Skin stretching, muscles tearing and knitting in new patterns, bones screaming into length. Underneath the pain, though, was something worse. Relief she had been living in. The wrong shape her entire life. She could feel that now, in every inch of new limb. The world was too sharp, too rich, too alive to ever go back to the muffled narrowness of a human skull. Her fur, she had fur. Thick and dark and smelling of snow bristled along her spine as she shook herself out of the last shreds of human clothing. The remnants hung from her like shed skin. The town smelled of old fear, of wood smoke and locked doors, and 1,000 nights of obedience to rules scratched on bulletin boards. The forest smelled. Right, she turned toward it. They were waiting at the tree line. Tall shapes that blurred the line between wolf and man. Some walked upright, digitigrade legs coiled with muscle. Others hunched on all fours, their shoulders too high. Their eyes were a gallery of gold and green and pale, icy blue. None of them stepped forward. A line had been scratched into the snow between the last house and the first tree. Raina could see it clearly, a raw trench of claw marks gouged down to frozen dirt, old blood darkening the edges. Bordeaux, a taller shape, stepped to the front. Massive shoulders, fur shot with silver. Its face was more wolf than human, but the intelligence in its gaze was terrifyingly familiar. It looked at her the way a parent might look at a child, who had wandered home covered in someone else's blood. When it spoke, it did so without words. Its meaning dropped straight into the part of her mind that now understood this language. You came back. The thought tasted like pine, sap and rust on her tongue. She answered without opening her mouth, her throat working around another growl. I didn't have a choice. The alpha tilted its head. None of us did. That's not the same as having no say in what we do with it. A wind passed over the borderline. On it, she could smell something else beyond the pack, something sour and hungry that didn't belong to either side. A cryptid thing, not quite wolf, not quite dog, something feral and wrong. Dogman, some would call it, in threads and forums and late-night horror story channels. The thing that had found the bus in the dark. The alpha's lip curled slightly, exposing teeth the size of her fingers. That one has been testing the edge for weeks. Found a weakness on the road. Took what it could from your driver. It will come again. It likes metal shells and easy prey. Raina saw, in a flash, the gouge marks along the bus, the way the howl hadn't echoed off the ridge. A rival to the old curse, a thing that liked to play with its food. So you want me to hunt it? She snarled, half aloud, half in that new inner voice. We want you to remember who your hunger belongs to. The alpha stepped aside, revealing the forest path, dark and inviting. Hunt the things that hunt them, and they will feed you stories instead of their bodies. Cross this line with them in your teeth, and the town will live to see another winter. And if I turn on the town, the question came out even more feral, then you won't cross back, and we'll tear you down before the sun finds what's left. No one survives the night it chooses and betrays. The old saying went. Maybe it had always meant this. The second howl rose from deeper in the forest, the rival calling. It had her scent, now hot and sharp, tangled with exhaust and old bus vinyl and new shed blood. Her muscles twitched toward the sound of it. She stepped over the line. The forest closed around her like a living throat. Snow cushioned her paws, the cold no longer a pain but a texture pressure, a cool hand on hot skin. Every tree had its own smell, its own history of animals brushing past. Rabbits, deer, foxes. Men. Her senses fed her 1,000 stories at once. She moved through them like a blade. The dogman's trail was easy to pick up. It stank of ambition, of hunger without rules. Its prints were wrong, too big for a wolf, too long for a dog, toes dragging like it couldn't quite decide which shape fit best. She ran. The world streaked past in shades of black and silver and blood moon red. Branches whipped at her fur and snapped against her shoulders. She heard the creak before she saw it. Water half frozen, the ice fractured where something heavy had crossed too fast. The dogman lurked just beyond, in a small clearing where the moonlight hit the snow like a spotlight. It was uglier up close. Its body looked assembled out of parts that had never seen each other before. Hind legs too long, forelimbs crooked, fur patchy, as if it had been burned and regrown in the wrong order. Its snout was elongated, teeth exposed in a permanent rictus. Its eyes were pale, almost white, with slitted pupils that narrowed when they focused on her. You smell new, it said. The voice came out like two people talking out of sync, human and monster-layered and failing to harmonize. Raina circled it, muscles coiled, her claws dug into the snow. You smell like something that doesn't belong. Belong, it repeated with amusement, like it was tasting an unfamiliar word. You think the mountain asked your pack to make rules? You think the forest signed your bargain? Only thing that belongs here is what can live here. It spread its arms wide, gesturing to the clearing, the ridges, the moon. Tell me which one of us looks more alive. The thing had a point. It moved with a chaotic kind of grace, every shift of limb unpredictable. It looked like a glitch in reality that had learnt how to stand. It reminded her, horribly, of herself before the change trapped between shapes, nothing fitting quite right, but the smell of it was wrong. Under the snow and fur and old blood was rot, a decay that spoke of things hunted not to eat, but to ruin, of livestock taken not for food but for fun, of people dragged off roads just to hear them scream. You hurt the driver, she said. Many drivers, it said, unapologetic. Little metal cans rolling up the hill, little soft things inside. You think I will stop? Behind the dogman, on the far side of the clearing, she saw something half buried, in snow, a torn piece of blue fabric, a hat crushed into the drift. Her vision tunneled. The gold of her eyes darkened. The dogman inhaled sharply. "Ah, there. You smell like the stories said you would." "What stories?" she growled. "Bloodline," it said. "Last bitch of the Holt line. I wanted to see if you'd come back. Thought maybe you'd hunt with me. This town tastes ripe." The word bitch was deliberate, a provocation. The part of her that remembered human offense bristled. The wolf in her didn't care about insults. It cared about the way the dogman had set town like a farm in some other world, some other legend. Maybe she would have taken its offer, given up rules, let the hunger run wherever it wanted. In this one, she pictured Marlon's face in the stairwell, the bitten scar on his neck, the way his eyes had looked when he'd said, "We don't run from our own monsters." "You are both," something in her whispered. "Monster and we," she moved. The fight was not clean. It wasn't a choreographed clash of beasts under a convenient thunderstorm. It was teeth and claws and snow and noise. The dogman was faster at first. It landed the first blow, a rake of claws along her flank that cut deep. Hot blood hit the cold air and steamed. Her snarl ripped up from somewhere with no human analog. She drove into it with all four limbs, shoulder lowering, jaws snapping. It twisted, but not fast enough. Her teeth closed on its side, fur and flesh giving way until she hit bone. She bit harder. The thing shrieked. The sound tried to crawl into her skull and rearrange it. She held on. They rolled through the snow, a tangle of fur and blood slamming into tree trunks, shattering branches. The moon watched. The forest did not interfere. This was older than the trees, older than the town, older than the rules on the bulletin board. It was territorial behavior made epic. At some point, she realized she was speaking in that wordless tongue again, drowning the dogman's guttural laughter in a stream of meaning. "Not yours, not your road, not your people." It responded with flashes of images in her mind, buses overturned, doors ripped off hinges, a town with all its doors hanging open and no one inside. It offered her that future like a gift. She bit through its throat. The fight ended with a sudden, horrible quiet. The dogman spasmed once and lay still, its body already looking less real without the wrongness animating it. Its eyes clouded, the pupils spreading into a featureless white. Steam rose from the wound in its neck, carrying with it a smell like burnt oil and old bones. Raina stood over it, panting. Her fur was matted with blood, some hers, some not. Her ribs ached, her legs screamed where one of its teeth had found purchase. She threw her head back and howled. This time the sound did echo. It rolled over the ridges, bounced off the face of the mountain, carried back to the town like a warning and a promise. Locals say the moon never glows the same after that night. They say something in it changed when the last Holt accepted a shape in the snow. What they don't say, what they won't say. Not to outsiders is that the echo that came back wasn't alone. Other howls braided into it, answering, proving, claiming. She dragged the dogman's body to the border. The pack waited just inside the trees, dark silhouettes against the snow. Marlon stood on the porch at the bar, human, shotgun in hand, the barrel pointed at the ground. His breath puffed in white plumes. Raina dropped the corpse on the town side of the line. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the alpha stepped forward, its paws deliberately erasing the boundary. It sniffed the dead cryptid once, and then bared, its teeth, not at her, at the thing that had dared hunt the wrong side. "You chose," it said. Her ribs hurt too much to answer in words. She dipped her head instead, breath leaving her in a rush that smoked in the cold. Behind the alpha, the others melted back into the trees. A patrol, a wall of moving teeth returning to their posts. Marlon lowered the shotgun fully. His eyes were wet in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. "Halleridge owes you its next season," he said softly. She didn't know if he was talking to her, or to the monster wearing her bones. Maybe there was no difference anymore. Morning came slow and grey. When she woke up, she was in the back booth of the bar, wrapped in 3 blankets. Every part of her hurt. Her muscles felt like someone had pulled them out, hammered them flat, and shoved them back in. Her skin was a map of bruises and fresh scars. She was naked under the blankets. Her clothes lay in shredded strips on the table, stained dark brown. With dried blood, Marlon sat on a stool opposite her, a mug of coffee cupped between his hands. His eyes were bruised with lack of sleep. Sawdust clung to his jeans. "What did I do?" she croaked. His gaze flicked up. "You kept the rules," he said. Mostly, images came back in fragments. The forest, the dogman, the taste of its blood, the way the snow had felt under her paws, the way the moon had looked, too big and too close. She squeezed her eyes shut. "I killed something. It would have kept killing if you hadn't," he said. "The agreement's old, Raina. We don't send our monsters into the town. And the things older than us don't cross the line if our teeth are sharp enough. Last few years, that balance started to slip. Took advantage of us getting softer, people leaving, bloodlines thinning." He slid something across the table. Her bus ticket. "There's a replacement bus coming up tonight," he said. "Road's been cleared. They'll take whoever still wants to go back down. No one will stop you." Her heart lurched. The idea of asphalt and city noise and narrow human sidewalks felt like remembering a dream she wasn't sure had been hers. "And if I stay?" she asked. Marlon nodded toward the window. Outside, the world looked ordinary. Snowbanks, tire tracks, smoke from chimneys. Beyond all that, the forest waited. "Then you learn our real winter rules," he said. "The ones we don't, right where outsiders can see." She looked down at her hands. Her nails were just nails. Her skin was just skin. But the memory of claws lived under it now. The echo of the howl lived in her chest. "If you're still here, the night hasn't let you go yet." She reached for the coffee. Her hand shook, but she didn't spill. "Teach me," she said. For just a moment, Marlon smiled. It made him look younger and much, much more tired. "Finish that," he said, nodding at the mug. "Then we start with the fun part." "What's the fun part?" "Figuring out which stories we're going to tell the next outsider so they ignore the right rules and follow the wrong ones." He took a sip of his own drink. "Keeps them from getting too curious about why towns like this survive as long as they do." She thought of the driver, of the bulletin board, of the scratched out line. "Do we tell them about the second howl?" she asked. Marlon looked at her over the rim of his mug. "Do you want them to survive their first night?" She thought about it. Then, slowly, she shook her head. Outside, up on the ridge, something moved between the trees. Not the dogman, never that thing again. This shape was taller, familiar. The alpha walked the border, making sure no new tracks crossed where they shouldn't. As it paced, its head turned once toward town, toward the bar's window, toward her. Raina lifted her hand just a little off the table. The alpha dipped its muzzle once and kept walking. "Ask the locals about that winter. They'll tell you the usual things about storms and power outages and a bus that almost slid off the road. They might mention an out-of-towner who decided to stay and help with the snowplow. They'll talk around the rest, words skirting the shape of the truth like mice circling a sleeping dog. What they won't talk about is what really changed. Not the color of the moon, not the number of howls in the night. The way the fear felt. It stopped being just prey fear. It became something more complicated. The kind of fear that comes when the monster at your door has your grandmother's eyes. That kind of horror doesn't end when the sun comes up. It just stretches, yawns, and waits for the next full moon. If you're still listening, if the story's breath is still fogging the inside of your skull, then you already know this. The night isn't done with you just because the telling stopped. Somewhere, there's a town you've never heard of sitting a little too close to the trees. Somewhere, there's a rule pinned to a bulletin board that no one will explain to you with a straight face. Somewhere, there's a bus that goes missing more winters than anyone writes down. And somewhere, under a moon that doesn't glow the way you remember, a woman with gold around her pupils is walking the edge between houses and forest, teeth aching every time she smells fresh fear. If this reminded you of a place you've driven through, of claw marks you convinced yourself were just old rot, of a howl you swore the mountain swallowed too quickly, leave a trace of it below. Name the road, name the town, or don't. Just mark that you heard something moving out there. Stories like this are warnings in disguise, scratched into the bark so the next traveler has a chance to turn around. If your hands are still steady enough to type, if your windows are still closed, if the scratching you hear is only in your head, for now share what the night stirred up in you. The ones walking the border read more than tracks. And if you ever find yourself in a place where the locals tell you not to listen for the second howl, take that bus ticket and burn it. Subscribe before the next full moon. If you're still here, the night hasn't let you go yet. Whispering Narratives was never just a channel. It's the place you come to remember that some roads, some forests, and some bloodlines are better left untraced. If you've ever felt the moon looking back at you, or heard a howl that didn't quite echo right, leave your mark below so the next traveler has a warning. And if you're brave enough to walk back into the dark with us, follow Whispering Narratives and subscribe before the next full moon.